Life is but a dream. We hear that a lot, and it's true. But let's clarify some things when it comes to this dream character of life. When we recognize that life is made up of a dreamlike quality, an illusionary projection that is reflected back onto the perceiver, there is a tendency to forget some fundamental principles that might lead one into false assumptions, which thereby enable one to be led astray from the spiritual path and into ignorance. The first false assumption is that everything that a dreamer perceives in the real-world dream is but a phantom projection. This is simply not true. The external world that a point of perception is operating in is entirely made up of consciousness. The entire universe is made up of consciousness. This consciousness is the fabric of the dream illusion that everything is sustained within. This spectrum is a shared context, created, sustained, and upheld by a multitude of points of perception, all weaving a collective dream. Most of the things that we perceive as an other are vibrational life, each with a real perspective. So the animals and people that surround us in this dream world are not lifeless ghost projections that you are creating in your mind. These life forms are sentient beings, just like you. And they live, feel, perceive, experience, and suffer just like you. To view other life forms as mere mind-created images with no sentience therein essentially fosters non-responsibility, recklessness, and a lack of compassion. There is no motive to conduct oneself in any particular way if every life form one is surrounded by is a fabricated phantom. Take, for example, the single-player video game. Does a player of such a game have a care in the world for any of the characters in the game? Not really, because he is aware that they are all programmed data. The characters are no different than the environment. But in the latest video games we see nowadays, mass multiplayer online games, where most of the characters we play amongst are controlled by a real human being somewhere, there is more care and emphasis on the conduct, because we are no longer interacting with programmed, non-player characters, but with characters that are linked up to a real human being. The real-world dream that we experience and live in is not unlike this mass multiplayer online game phenomena. And while true that we are all one, and separation is an illusion, all the illusions of separation go into making up the whole. So there is a oneness, but within this oneness there are many parts. What goes into making up an ocean is a multitude of droplets of water. One droplet of water does not produce an ocean, unless of course you change scale and discover that within a droplet of water there is an ocean. But even the ocean within a drop of water is made out of a multitude of droplets of water, each droplet of water containing an ocean therein. All points of consciousness are like these droplets of water. Pure mind is like pure water. Both consciousness and water are fluid and shapeless, formless by their very nature, ever-changing energy. This is who your true self is. It's not anything else. Not gender, not sexual orientation, not race, not religion, not any concept or object within the dream world inventory. None of these things identify who you really are. So to discover who you really are, you have to unidentify with these things. which means giving up attachment and indulgence in these things. Now, there are some concepts out there of how within a dream the key to ending all suffering and a step towards enlightenment comes through being unconcerned with the way the dream content is arranged. Well, first it must be recognized that in order to even be in a position to be unconcerned with the way the content is arranged, is to first be concerned with the way the content is arranged. This is what enables us to function, to walk, communicate, use language, identify dangers and benefits. Without such, we would be unfunctionable, or immediately mowed down as we take our first step into the world. There is need to conduct oneself in certain ways, and one must sometimes be concerned with the way the content is arranged to avoid hazard, ruin, peril, and death. Example, saving a life, saving your own life. Pain is not really the issue because it can be subjective, as in the bondage, domination, sadomasochism example. The issue is with suffering, which everyone recognizes as something, even if the person has totally flipped the script on pain and pleasure. But eliminating your own suffering and then becoming unconcerned about others simply because you have found a tranquil bubble is selfish, the true mark of a beginner. An attitude of I don't care only enables selfishness and indulgence. Because all of this really begs the question to those that abide, encourage, and teach the ways of unconcern. If nothing matters, and no change is necessary, and content and conduct are irrelevant, why are you teaching? Why are you even getting out of bed? If everything is fine just the way it is, there is no need to tell one they are fine just the way they are, because they are fine just the way they are, even if they themselves are not fine with just the way they are. And hence, by this way of thinking, suffering is fine just the way it is. But of course, this need not be true. And this is what you would assume a spiritual guide is here to do, to help eliminate suffering. If everything, including suffering, were fine just the way it is, then there is no need for a spiritual guide. An interesting point is that one who really claims that they are truly unconcerned with the content of a dream is not being fully honest. Because if a Mack truck was barreling down on such a person, you could bet they're gonna step out of the way. If such a person sees a 3-year-old child teetering on the edge of a building, you can bet they're gonna pull them down to safety. If they don't, if they let themselves get run over by the truck, or if they let the child fall to their death, they are not anything resembling a truly enlightened person. If one point of perception transcends suffering, it does not necessarily eliminate all suffering in the universe. If so, then not one person has accomplished it yet, at least not in this frame of reference. If all it takes to eliminate all suffering is for one point of perception to master being unconcerned with how the dream content is arranged, then apparently not one point of perception has mastered this yet. Otherwise, why hasn't the dream world harmonized with that point of perception? Because in this way of thinking, if one has mastered truly suffering within themselves, there should truly be no suffering outside of themselves. And this is not the case. Unless, of course, you view everything outside of yourself as some phantom projection, which is not the case also. If you are unconcerned with the way the content of the dream is arranged, you have not mastered suffering. You have instead mastered fear within a nightmare. Being unafraid in a nightmare is a great accomplishment, but keep moving and don't stop there. You are unafraid, but yet you are still in a nightmare. And is this subjective? No. The way to recognize that you are still in a nightmare is if there is suffering anywhere. So if one has found peace by conquering fear, then one must begin to try to harmonize one's dream. Otherwise, you are just resting your laurels on the fact that you've conquered fear, and now linger unconcerned in a nightmare, embracing it as an acceptable norm, which leads one to do absolutely nothing, and in fact leads one to justify clouding their pure mind. There are some concepts about how virtue and conduct interfere with self-discovery and enlightenment. But virtue and conduct don't interfere with self-discovery because there really is no self-identifiers. All there is consciousness, an awareness. Is it necessary for one to hit bottom before they can rise up? Good teachers, good guides, good masters make sinking to the depths unnecessary, because they impart the wisdom, then contrive situations where the teachings and lessons will translate on a small scale. One does not need to fall from a tall building and kill oneself to understand the dangers of falling. All one must understand is the empirical experience of tripping and falling down. So if applied correctly, virtue and conduct do not interfere with self-discovery and enlightenment. Virtue and conduct are simply tools of training, and any and all training is aimed at unclouding pure mind. This is what it's all about. Discovering pure mind, our true nature. Do not become detached and unconcerned to the point where this itself clouds your pure mind. There is need for spiritual work. There is need for training the mind. There comes a point, if one wants to achieve enlightenment, that one must act. And true that even though we have an unlimited infinity to do so, why not act now? A key issue here is defilement. A defilement can be defined as anything that clouds pure mind. Now, being totally unconcerned about the dream content is not without merit. It is the mastery of fear and enables one to take it a step further, because being without fear does not necessarily guarantee one pure mind. And this is why the teaching of being unconcerned with the dream content is a teaching better suited for those that are very spiritually advanced. It is simply not practical for beginners on the spiritual path for the quest for pure mind. Now, conduct and virtue in themselves is not what sustains pure mind, but rather tools that are used to avoid defilement. Tools that are used to help guide one towards pure mind. And although in some cases it has been necessary for one to sink to the absolute lowest depths of ignorance for there to be an awakening, this is not necessarily a rule. We should rediscover our natural selves, our true nature of pure mind. Pure mind naturally leads to pure harmony. Pure mind rids itself of suffering, or anything else that would form an attachment to anchor it down, lest pure mind become clouded mind.